The lights went out so suddenly that the entire neighborhood seemed to stop breathing. Air conditioners fell silent, streetlights vanished, and the only sound left was the distant rumble of summer thunder rolling across the hills outside Cedar Ridge, Ohio. As I stood on my porch staring into the darkness, my elderly neighbor, Grace Sullivan, called across the yard and asked if I could stay with her until the power returned because storms always reminded her of difficult years she had spent alone. I had no idea that a single evening without electricity would change both of our lives forever. If stories about kindness, hope, forgiveness, compassion, and second chances mean something to you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these uplifting stories reach more people. At 28, I had recently moved to Cedar Ridge after accepting a teaching position at the local middle school. I barely knew anyone, and most evenings ended with quiet dinners and unanswered thoughts about whether I had made the right decision to leave my hometown. Grace had been the first person to welcome me with homemade cookies and a smile that somehow made an unfamiliar place feel a little more like home. She lived alone in the weathered blue house next door, surrounded by colorful flowers she cared for every morning. That evening, the heat settled heavily over the neighborhood as rain clouds gathered overhead. Grace admitted that blackouts always made her anxious because they reminded her of the night her husband had passed away many years earlier during a terrible storm. She did not want to spend another dark evening by herself. We lit a few candles, opened the windows to let in the warm breeze, and talked while listening to the rain begin tapping gently against the roof. Hours passed without electricity, but somehow the darkness encouraged honesty. Grace shared stories about raising her son, Michael, who had moved across the country after college. Their relationship had slowly faded into occasional holiday phone calls and short birthday messages. Neither had intentionally hurt the other, yet years of silence had quietly built a wall neither knew how to climb. As she spoke, I recognized a sadness that reminded me of my own strained relationship with my father after my parents' divorce. We had both become experts at pretending everything was fine while quietly carrying regrets. The storm eventually passed, leaving behind an unusual silence. Without televisions, phones, or bright lights competing for attention, we listened to crickets singing outside and laughed over memories of childhood summers before technology filled every moment. Near midnight, the electricity suddenly returned. Every lamp in the living room blinked on at once, startling both of us. Grace had been in the middle of changing out of the heavy rain-soaked sweater she had worn while checking her windows earlier in the evening and had only managed to slip on a fresh cardigan over a simple undershirt before the lights flashed back unexpectedly. Embarrassed by the surprise, she laughed, quickly finished getting comfortable, and joked that the power company certainly had poor timing. The awkward moment lasted only seconds before we both laughed together, grateful that the storm was finally over. The next morning, I found myself thinking less about the blackout and more about Grace's unfinished story about her son. Something told me that if she truly wanted another chance, someone had to encourage the first step. After a long conversation over breakfast, she agreed to write Michael a handwritten letter instead of waiting for the perfect moment that never seemed to arrive. She poured every apology, every memory, and every hope into those pages. I drove her to the post office myself. Weeks passed. Summer slowly gave way to cooler evenings, and life returned to its familiar rhythm. Then one Saturday afternoon, a pickup truck stopped in front of Grace's house. A tall man stepped out, holding the worn letter in one hand. Before he even reached the porch, Grace was already walking toward him with tears in her eyes. There were no dramatic speeches, only a long embrace that seemed to erase years of distance. Watching from my porch, I realized that forgiveness rarely begins with perfect words. It begins with the courage to reach out. Michael stayed for several days, repairing loose fence boards, trimming overgrown bushes, and filling the quiet house with laughter that had been missing for far too long. He thanked me for encouraging his mother to write, because he had wanted to reconnect for years but believed she no longer needed him. Both had been waiting for the other to make the first move. One simple letter had accomplished what years of silence never could. Their reunion inspired me to face my own fears. I called my father for the first time in nearly 2 years. Our conversation was hesitant at first, but neither of us wanted another season to pass with regret. A month later, we met for dinner, and although we could not change the past, we discovered we could still build something meaningful for the future. That unforgettable blackout became more than a story about losing electricity. It became a reminder that when life's distractions disappear, what truly matters becomes easier to see. Kindness grows when someone stays instead of leaving. Before we reach the end, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment and tell us about a time when a simple act of kindness changed someone's life, or your own. Sometimes the brightest light does not come when the power returns. Sometimes it appears the moment one caring person decides that no one should have to face the darkness alone.